"You shouldn't touch anything," the bride said, her voice light but sharp enough to cut through the soft violin music drifting across the ballroom, and the laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Naomi Carter feel every pair of eyes turn toward her at once, the crystal chandeliers above reflecting warm golden light across polished marble floors that stretched nearly 50 feet across the grand reception hall, the scent of white roses and fresh linen hanging gently in the air as waitstaff moved quietly between round tables draped in ivory silk, Naomi holding a silver tray steady in her hands while the champagne glasses trembled just slightly from the sudden attention, her black uniform crisp but simple against a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, her name tag catching the light as she lowered her gaze for just a moment, not out of shame, but habit, the kind built from years of learning how to stay invisible in rooms where people like her were never meant to stand. Emily Whitmore adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, her white satin gown flowing behind her like something pulled from a magazine cover, her smile polished, practiced, and just distant enough to make the moment feel deliberate. "I just don't want the photos ruined," she added softly, her words wrapped in politeness but landing heavier than they sounded. A few guests near the front exchanged glances, someone coughed quietly, and Naomi stepped slightly back, careful, precise, her shoes barely making a sound against the marble, her eyes briefly catching the reflection of herself in the tall glass windows overlooking the manicured garden outside, where strings of warm lights stretched across the lawn and a fountain shimmered under the late afternoon sun, the entire wedding costing more than Naomi had earned in the last 10 years combined. She steadied the tray and moved toward the side table, her movement smooth, professional, her breathing slow, measured, and calm, because moments like this weren't new, just different settings, different chandeliers, different faces, but the same quiet expectation that she would fade into the background without a ripple. Nearby, a little girl in a pale blue flower dress shifted nervously beside her chair, her tiny white shoes tapping softly against the floor, her fingers twisting the ribbon around her wrist as the crowd's voices grew louder. Naomi noticed the trembling first, then the way the girl's shoulders lifted slightly as if she were holding back tears. Naomi paused for half a second, just enough to notice, just enough to care, but before she could move, Emily's laughter rang again, light and effortless, as she turned toward her bridesmaids, the diamonds in her earrings catching the light like small flashes, and the room seemed to settle into a new rhythm, conversations resuming, glasses clinking softly, waitstaff moving in practiced silence, but Naomi could still feel the echo of that moment lingering, like a small ripple across still water. She placed the tray carefully on the linen-covered table, aligning the glasses with quiet precision, her fingers steady now, her posture straight, the warm glow of sunset filtering through the tall windows behind her, casting long golden reflections across the polished floor, and as the violin music shifted into a softer melody, Naomi exhaled slowly, her expression calm, composed, her presence quiet but grounded, as if the room itself hadn't changed her at all, as if she had learned long ago that dignity didn't need permission. And somewhere near the entrance, the grand doors opened softly, letting in a gentle breeze that stirred the white roses, the golden light deepening, and for just a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath without knowing why. Naomi Carter moved quietly along the edge of the ballroom, her polished black shoes gliding across the marble floor as the violin softened into a gentle piano melody, the golden light outside shifting toward early evening while the garden beyond the glass walls filled slowly with guests drifting toward cocktail tables set beside trimmed hedges and glowing lanterns. She reached for a folded linen napkin and adjusted the arrangement near the dessert display, her movements careful and precise, the way she had learned after years of temporary shifts and quiet work, never drawing attention, never disrupting the rhythm of rooms that were never built for her presence. The little girl in the pale blue flower dress remained near her chair, her small hand still twisting the ribbon as her eyes darted toward the growing crowd. Naomi noticed again the faint tremble in the child's shoulders and the way she pressed her lips together as if trying to stay brave. Naomi glanced briefly toward the head table where Emily Whitmore stood surrounded by bridesmaids, laughter rising in polished bursts that echoed against the tall ceiling. Then Naomi lowered herself slightly, her voice gentle and warm as she spoke softly to the girl, asking if she needed a glass of water. The girl nodded almost immediately, her relief quiet but visible. Naomi reached for a small crystal glass and filled it halfway, careful not to spill, then handed it over with both hands, the child's fingers small against the glass, her breathing slowly easing as she took a sip. Naomi offered a small reassuring smile. the kind that did not ask for attention, only comfort, and for a moment the tension in the girl's shoulders softened. Across the room a photographer adjusted his camera, the soft clicking of shutters blending into the hum of conversation, the air filled with the scent of buttercream frosting and warm appetizers being passed on silver trays. Naomi rose slowly, smoothing her uniform, the faint reflection of her silhouette catching again in the glass panels as she stepped back, but just as she turned, one of the bridesmaids noticed the interaction and leaned toward Emily, whispering something that made the bride's expression tighten slightly. Emily's gaze followed the line of sight until it settled on Naomi and the flower girl, her smile thinning as she walked across the floor, the soft fabric of her gown brushing gently behind her, the room gradually quieting as she approached, not because anyone was told to stop talking, but because the subtle shift in her presence changed the atmosphere. Naomi straightened instinctively, her hands resting calmly at her sides, the little girl still holding the glass of water beside her. Emily stopped just a few feet away, her tone still controlled but edged with something colder as she spoke, saying that the child had a coordinator assigned and that staff should not interfere, her words wrapped in courtesy yet unmistakably firm. Naomi nodded respectfully, her voice quiet as she apologized and stepped back. The little girl looked up at Naomi briefly, her expression hesitant as if she wanted to say something but did not. Emily turned slightly, guiding the child gently but decisively toward the bridesmaids, her smile returning for the watching guests. The moment dissolving into the hum of the evening, Naomi remained still for a second longer, the fading warmth of the sunset now casting longer shadows across the marble floor, the golden light dimming into a softer glow as the indoor chandeliers brightened overhead, and as Naomi resumed her movement toward the service table, her expression remained calm, composed, and steady, as if the moment had simply passed like the shifting light, unnoticed by most, but carried quietly within her. While near the entrance the grand doors opened again and the evening air slipped into the ballroom, carrying the faint sound of distant laughter from the garden as the celebration continued to build, unaware that the quiet tension lingering beneath the elegance had only just begun to unfold. The chandeliers brightened gradually as the sun dipped lower beyond the tall glass walls, and the golden hue inside the ballroom shifted into a softer evening glow. Waiters moved quietly with silver trays while guests drifted toward their seats, the gentle sound of cutlery being placed on porcelain plates blending with the low hum of conversation. Naomi Carter adjusted the arrangement of folded place cards at table 7, her finger steady as she aligned each name in a straight line. The scent of roasted chicken and fresh herbs floated in from the catering station, and she stepped slightly aside to allow another staff member to pass, her movements calm and practiced, the rhythm of service grounding her. Across the room Emily Whitmore stood near the head table, her posture poised as she greeted a group of well-dressed guests, her laughter light and polished, her hand resting gently on the back of a chair as photographers circled quietly, capturing candid moments beneath the soft glow of warm lighting. Naomi glanced briefly toward the entrance as a subtle shift in attention moved through the room. The grand doors opened slowly, and Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, his navy tuxedo crisp against the muted tones of the ballroom, his presence calm but noticeable, not because he demanded attention, but because the energy around him seemed to settle as he moved forward. A few guests turned with polite smiles, some offering quiet congratulations. Daniel responded with a nod and a warm handshake, his expression relaxed yet thoughtful, as if he were absorbing every detail of the evening. Naomi returned her focus to the table, adjusting a water glass that caught the chandelier light, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. She did not expect to be noticed, she never did. And yet as Daniel walked deeper into the ballroom, his eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the arrangement of flowers, the seating, the guests, and then briefly, his gaze paused near the service table. Naomi did not immediately see him. She was helping an older guest reposition a chair slightly closer to the table, her voice soft and respectful. The guest thanked her quietly, and Naomi offered a small nod before stepping back. Daniel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, as if a faint memory had surfaced. He watched for a moment longer, then another guest approached him, pulling his attention away. Conversation resumed, laughter lifted again, and Naomi moved toward the beverage station, refilling pitchers with fresh iced water, condensation forming along the glass as she placed them carefully on the linen cloth. Nearby, the flower girl in the pale blue dress sat beside her assigned seat now, her shoulders more relaxed, her ribbon resting neatly in her lap. Naomi noticed the change with a quiet sense of relief. The evening continued to unfold with gentle elegance. Servers moved in coordinated silence, Plates were delivered, candles flickered softly along each table, and Daniel Whitmore gradually made his way toward the head table. Emily greeted him with a composed smile. Her hand resting lightly on his arm, the photographer captured the moment, flashes soft and controlled, but Daniel's attention seemed divided, his gaze drifting once more across the ballroom, searching without urgency, as if something subtle had caught his memory. Naomi meanwhile stepped toward the far end of the room, collecting empty glasses, her posture steady, her presence quiet as the celebration deepened, unaware that the subtle shift in Daniel's expression had not gone unnoticed by a few nearby guests, and as the music transitioned into a softer instrumental, the room settled into anticipation for the next moment of the evening, the air warm, elegant, and calm, yet beneath the polished surface, a quiet thread of recognition had begun to form, fragile and almost invisible, waiting for the moment it would finally be seen. Soft instrumental music drifted through the ballroom as servers began placing dinner plates in front of guests, the warm glow from candles reflecting gently across polished silverware and crystal glasses. Naomi Carter moved carefully between tables carrying a tray of freshly poured iced tea, the condensation cool against her fingers as she paused beside table 4, setting each glass down with quiet precision, her posture steady, her expression calm. The scent of rosemary and roasted vegetables filled the air as conversations grew softer and more intimate, laughter now quieter and more contained. Daniel Whitmore sat beside Emily at the head table, listening politely as an older guest spoke about the Whitmore family estate, but his gaze drifted again across the ballroom, his eyes settling briefly near the service station where Naomi stood adjusting a linen cloth, something in her movement slow and composed, something familiar in the way she paused before stepping aside to allow another server to pass. Daniel leaned slightly forward, his attention narrowing for a moment. Emily noticed the shift and followed his line of sight, her expression tightening subtly as she spotted Naomi again, the same quiet staff member from earlier. Emily lowered her voice and said something softly about timing and professionalism, her tone still pleasant but edged with quiet control. Daniel nodded absent-mindedly, though his attention remained divided. Across the room the flower girl suddenly shifted in her seat, her small hands gripping the edge of the table as the noise level rose slightly with plates being served. Her breathing quickened again. Naomi noticed immediately from across the aisle. She placed her empty tray down gently and stepped closer, crouching just enough to meet the child's eye level. Her voice soft, asking if the room felt too loud. The girl nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. Naomi reached for a folded cloth napkin and gently placed it in the child's hands, suggesting she hold it and breathe slowly. The girl followed quietly, her shoulders easing as Naomi stayed beside her for a brief moment. Nearby guests watched with mild curiosity, not dramatic, just quiet observation. Daniel noticed the interaction clearly this time, his expression shifting again as recognition deepened. He leaned back slightly, his eyes fixed on Naomi, the calmness in her presence, the steady patience, the way she stepped back without drawing attention once the child relaxed. Emily noticed Daniel's gaze linger and her smile tightened slightly. She adjusted her posture, lifting her chin with composed elegance. Naomi rose slowly and returned to the service area, her movements quiet, unaware of the growing stillness at the head table. Daniel's fingers rested lightly on the edge of his glass, his mind tracing something half-remembered. The sound of soft piano filled the pause, candles flickered gently, and the evening continued with polished grace, but Daniel's gaze did not fully return to the conversation. Instead he watched Naomi once more as she collected empty plates near the far table, her calm presence cutting through the polished noise of the celebration, and as a subtle hush moved across the ballroom for the upcoming toast, Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, his expression thoughtful, as if the memory forming in his mind was finally beginning to take shape. The room gradually quieted as the master of ceremonies stepped toward the microphone near the head table, the soft hum of conversation fading into anticipation. Naomi Carter lifted a tray of empty glasses from table 9, her movement steady and measured, the faint glow of candlelight reflecting across the polished surface of the tray as she turned carefully toward the service station. The sound of silverware settling against porcelain echoed gently as guests adjusted in their chairs. Daniel Whitmore remained seated beside Emily, but his attention had not fully returned to the evening's formalities. His gaze drifted again toward Naomi as she moved between tables, something in the rhythm of her presence pulling quietly at his memory. The master of ceremonies began speaking about family traditions and lifelong friendships, his voice warm and confident, drawing polite smiles from guests. Naomi placed the tray down softly and reached for a pitcher of iced water, the condensation cool against her fingertips as she refilled glasses at the far table, her posture calm, her expression composed. A nearby guest thanked her quietly. She nodded with a gentle smile and stepped back. Across the room, Emily leaned slightly toward Daniel, her voice low and controlled as she mentioned that the staff seemed unusually visible tonight, her tone polite but edged with quiet irritation. Daniel listened but did not immediately respond, his eyes still following Naomi as she turned toward the flower girl's table once more. The child shifted slightly again. Overwhelmed by the growing attention of speeches and raised voices, Naomi approached slowly. Kneeling just enough to speak softly, the girl nodded as Naomi suggested she focus on counting the flicker of the candle beside her. The child followed, her breathing easing. Daniel's expression changed more noticeably now, recognition deepening. His fingers tightened slightly around the stem of his glass. Emily noticed the shift and her posture stiffened subtly. She followed Daniel's gaze and saw Naomi again. The same quiet presence drawing attention she believed should remain focused on the head table. Emily's smile tightened as she leaned toward a nearby coordinator, whispering briefly. The coordinator nodded and began walking toward Naomi, the movement subtle but purposeful. Naomi rose slowly after the child settled, turning to step away when the coordinator approached, speaking politely but firmly, suggesting that the flower girl already had assigned assistants and that Naomi should return to her designated service area. Naomi nodded respectfully, her voice calm as she apologized and stepped back. Nearby guests exchanged small glances, nothing dramatic, just quiet awareness. Daniel watched closely, the subtle firmness in Naomi's response, the composed dignity in her posture, the same calm presence now stirring a clearer memory. Emily straightened in her chair, her expression polished but cool, as the master of ceremonies concluded the opening remarks and invited Daniel to prepare for his upcoming toast. Applause rose softly. Daniel placed his glass down slowly, his gaze lingering on Naomi one more time as she returned to the service station, the candlelight flickering gently across her face as she arranged folded linens. And as Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, the quiet recognition forming in his expression grew stronger, as if the memory he had been searching for was now only moments away from surfacing. While the entire ballroom settled into expectant silence for the next moment of the evening, unaware that the calm dignity of one quiet presence had already begun to reshape the energy of the room. The applause softened as Daniel Whitmore slowly rose from his chair, the subtle scrape of his seat against the polished floor barely audible beneath the gentle piano music that filled the ballroom. Candlelight flickered across crystal glasses while guests turned their attention toward the head table, expecting a formal toast. Naomi Carter stood near the service station arranging folded linen napkins with quiet precision, her movements calm and deliberate as she aligned each corner, the warm glow from the chandeliers reflecting across the silver tray beside her. She did not look toward the head table. She had learned long ago that moments like this belonged to others, not to her. Daniel rested one hand lightly on the table as he stood, his expression thoughtful rather than celebratory. His gaze moved slowly across the room, not scanning the guests, but searching, as if trying to confirm something that had quietly taken shape in his memory. Emily Whitmore watched him with a composed smile, her posture elegant, her fingers resting lightly against the stem of her glass, but her eyes followed his movement carefully. Sensing the shift in his demeanor, the room settled into stillness, forks lowered, conversations paused, the quiet expectation of a traditional toast filling the air. Daniel took one slow step away from his chair, then another, the movement subtle but unexpected. The master of ceremonies lowered the microphone slightly, unsure. Guests exchanged brief glances, the soft hum of the piano continued in the background. Naomi lifted a small stack of polished silverware, her attention focused downward, unaware of the change in the room. Daniel's footsteps were measured and calm as he moved away from the head table, not toward the podium, but toward the center aisle. The shift was gentle yet unmistakable. A few guests turned their heads, curiosity rising quietly. Emily's smile held, but her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly as she watched him move. Naomi placed the silverware down carefully, adjusting a napkin beneath it, the faint clink of metal against porcelain soft and controlled. Then she reached for a glass pitcher, her reflection briefly visible in the polished surface, and at that moment she sensed the quiet change in the atmosphere, the subtle stillness that spread through the room like a ripple across calm water. She lifted her gaze slightly, not fully, just enough to notice the guests turning their attention toward the aisle. Daniel continued walking slowly, his expression calm, his eyes steady, the candlelight casting warm shadows along the marble floor, his steps unhurried, deliberate, as if each movement carried quiet meaning. Naomi straightened gently, her hands resting lightly at her sides, unsure but composed, the distance between them narrowing. The room now almost silent except for the soft piano notes drifting through the air. Emily watched from the head table, her composure still intact, but her fingers tightened slightly around her glass. Nearby guests leaned subtly forward, sensing the shift without fully understanding it. Naomi remained still, her expression calm, her breathing steady. As Daniel approached within several feet, the golden light from the chandeliers reflecting softly across both of them, and for a moment the entire ballroom seemed suspended in quiet anticipation, the elegant celebration pausing not because anyone had asked it to, but because something deeper than ceremony had begun to unfold. And Daniel Whitmore slowed his steps, his gaze meeting Naomi Carter for the first time with unmistakable recognition forming in his eyes. Daniel Whitmore stopped a few feet from Naomi Carter, the warm chandelier light settling softly across the polished floor between them, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke, the quiet in the ballroom deepening as guests leaned subtly forward, trying to understand the unexpected shift in the evening. Naomi held her posture calm and respectful, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her expression composed but attentive. Daniel studied her face carefully, as if confirming something he had almost forgotten. Then his voice came quietly, steady but unmistakably personal as he asked if they had met before. Naomi blinked softly, surprised but calm, her eyes searching his face with quiet politeness. She answered gently that she did not believe they had, her tone respectful and professional. Daniel nodded slightly, but the recognition in his expression only deepened. He exhaled slowly as the memory surfaced more clearly, the sound of piano notes drifting softly behind them, and then he spoke again, his voice warm but filled with quiet certainty, saying that 2 winters ago, during a heavy snowfall outside Chicago, his car had stalled along a quiet road near a small medical center, and that a woman had helped him inside, guiding him through the icy parking lot while he struggled to stay steady. Naomi's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the faintest spark of recognition forming in her eyes. Daniel continued softly, describing how the waiting room had been nearly empty, how the fluorescent lights had flickered gently above them, and how the woman had stayed with him until the staff arrived, refusing to leave until she knew he was safe. Naomi's fingers moved slightly, the memory now clearly returning. She nodded gently, her voice soft as she remembered that night. She explained that she had been visiting her mother at the clinic and noticed him outside in the cold. She had simply helped him get inside and then returned to her mother's room. Daniel's expression softened, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude as he confirmed that she had left before he could properly thank her, and that he had asked the front desk later but they had not known her name. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly, her calm humility unchanged. She replied that it had only been a small thing, just someone helping another person. Daniel shook his head slowly, the gesture gentle but firm, as he said that it had not been small to him. That night had come during one of the most difficult weeks of his life, and that her quiet kindness had stayed with him ever since. The room remained still, guests exchanging subtle glances. Emily Whitmore watched from the head table, her composed smile now strained, her fingers resting motionless against the stem of her glass. The silence in the ballroom deepened as Daniel's words settled softly across the room. Naomi stood quietly, her posture still humble, her expression calm, as if the moment belonged not to recognition but to something quieter, something rooted in simple kindness. And the soft glow of candlelight flickered between them as the entire ballroom absorbed the unexpected truth unfolding in the center of the elegant celebration. The silence in the ballroom lingered, gentle yet unmistakable, as Daniel Whitmore's words settled across the room like a quiet ripple. Naomi Carter stood with calm dignity, her hands relaxed at her sides, the soft candlelight reflecting across her uniform as if framing the simplicity of her presence against the polished elegance surrounding her. Daniel's expression softened further, and after a brief pause he spoke again, his voice steady and sincere as he thanked her openly, not just for that winter night, but for reminding him that kindness often appears when it is least expected. Naomi gave a small, humble nod, her voice quiet as she replied that anyone would have done the same, but Daniel shook his head gently, his tone warm yet firm as he explained that not everyone would have stopped in the freezing wind, not everyone would have stayed until help arrived, and not everyone would have left without asking for recognition. The guests nearby listened in silence, some exchanging thoughtful glances, while others leaned slightly forward, drawn into the sincerity of the moment. Emily Whitmore remained seated at the head table, her posture still elegant but noticeably tense, her fingers resting motionless against the linen as she watched the interaction unfold. Daniel then did something unexpected. he stepped slightly to the side, turning just enough to face the guests, his voice calm but clear as he spoke to the room, explaining that the woman standing beside him had shown him compassion during a difficult moment in his life, and that he had never forgotten the quiet strength in her kindness. The attention in the room deepened, conversations paused completely, and even the soft piano music seemed to fade into the background. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly, her humility unchanged, as if the spotlight resting on her felt unfamiliar. Daniel turned back toward her, his expression respectful, and asked her name. Naomi answered softly, saying Naomi Carter. Daniel nodded slowly, repeating her name with quiet appreciation, as if committing it carefully to memory. Then he extended his hand, the gesture calm and sincere. Naomi hesitated for just a moment, surprised but composed, then gently shook his hand, the simple gesture carrying more meaning than any formal introduction. The candlelight flickered softly between them. Guests watched quietly, the elegance of the evening now reshaped by a moment of unexpected humanity. Emily's composed smile had faded slightly, replaced by a thoughtful stillness. While Daniel released Naomi's hand and gave a small nod of gratitude, Naomi stepped back respectfully, her posture returning to quiet professionalism, but the atmosphere in the room had already changed, the earlier tension replaced by a softer warmth, as if the celebration had shifted from polished formality to something more meaningful. And as Naomi turned gently toward the service station, the soft glow of the chandeliers followed her movement, while Daniel remained standing for a brief moment longer, his expression calm and reflective, before slowly turning back toward the head table, leaving behind a silence that felt no longer tense, but quietly filled with respect. Daniel Whitmore walked slowly back toward the head table, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting along the polished marble floor beneath his steps. The room remained unusually quiet as guests followed his movement, the earlier formality of the evening replaced with a calm, reflective stillness. Naomi Carter returned to the service station, her posture composed, her movements gentle as she lifted a folded linen and adjusted a row of glasses. She did not look toward the head table again, not out of discomfort, but from a quiet habit of returning to her role once the moment had passed. The piano melody shifted into a softer tune, warm and understated, as Daniel reached his chair and paused briefly before sitting. Emily Whitmore looked at him, her expression controlled, but the tension in her posture remained, her fingers resting lightly against the table as she studied the calm in Daniel's face. He offered her a small, polite smile before taking his seat. The master of ceremonies stepped forward again, gently clearing his throat and lifting the microphone, his voice warm as he invited Daniel to share his toast. Daniel stood once more, this time facing the guests directly, his tone calm and sincere as he spoke about gratitude, about the quiet moments that shape a life, and about the importance of kindness that often goes unnoticed. The guests listened attentively, the earlier energy of the celebration now softened by reflection. Naomi continued her work quietly, refilling glasses and clearing plates, the faint sound of silverware and porcelain blending with Daniel's steady voice. Emily watched him, her expression gradually softening as she absorbed the sincerity in his words. When Daniel finished, gentle applause filled the room, warm but respectful. The music resumed softly, and conversations returned in a quieter tone than before. Naomi lifted a tray and moved toward the far side of the ballroom, her presence calm and steady. As she passed near the flower girl's table, the little girl looked up at her with a small smile, her ribbon resting neatly in her lap. Naomi returned the smile gently before continuing. The chandeliers above cast a warm glow across the elegant setting. Guests resumed their dinner, laughter returned softly, but the atmosphere felt different. Quieter, more thoughtful. Emily remained seated for a moment, then slowly rose and walked toward the service area, her steps measured, her posture composed. Naomi noticed her approach and straightened respectfully. Emily paused, her voice lower than before, her tone controlled but noticeably softer. She thanked Naomi for helping the flower girl earlier, the words brief but sincere. Naomi nodded gently, her voice calm as she replied that she was glad the child felt better. Emily gave a small nod, her expression thoughtful, then turned and walked back toward the head table, the moment quiet and understated. Naomi resumed her work, placing glasses carefully onto the tray, the soft clink of crystal blending with the music. Outside the tall windows the evening sky deepened into twilight, garden lights glowed softly, and the celebration continued with quiet elegance. Naomi carried the tray toward the exit leading to the service hallway, her silhouette briefly framed by the warm golden light behind her. As she stepped through the doorway, the ballroom remained filled with soft music, candlelight, and the gentle murmur of guests. and for a brief moment Daniel glanced toward the doorway where she had disappeared, his expression calm, reflective, and grateful, before turning back to the celebration, while the warm glow of the chandeliers continued to shine over the quiet dignity that had reshaped the evening without a single raised voice.